Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the fifth webinar. I can't believe it's already the fifth one, but this is the fifth webinar in the California Trailblazer series presented by Shift3 Technologies. So I'm just going to give people a couple more minutes to log in. Although it is a Tuesday, for some reason, every day feels like a Monday these days. So let's give everyone just a couple more minutes to get logged in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. I'm sure you guys all have 5 more video conference calls to be on today, so I want to get you back to your regularly scheduled program. So for those of you that are attending the California Trailblazer series for the first time, this was actually originally designed as a road show, and our hope was that we would be able to visit various cities throughout California and meet each of you face to face. That's the reason today's webinar is called Irvine, because that's where we had intended to be. But nonetheless, our fate was a little bit different than we thought. And fortunately for us, through technology, we're still able to connect with you and provide you with some information that we find we think will be valuable for your Salesforce org. So each of the series, each of the sessions in this series was designed to be unique in that it has a unique keynote speaker that covers a variety of different topics, as well as a training session. Each of the sessions have different topics so that you can attend one or you can attend all of them. Today is a little bit different in that our keynote speaker will be doing a chapter 2 of his session that he did earlier in this series. So for those of you that are coming back to hear chapter 2, thank you for returning. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Janae Dubois, the Executive Director of Growth Marketing for Shift3 Technologies. In today's session, we will have a keynote from Jeff Scott, followed by a training session from Bradley Norris. I will then open it up to questions. So I want to direct your attention at this time to the GoToWebinar control panel. In that you will see a questions tab, and I encourage you throughout the presentation, as you hear from both of the speakers, to utilize that questions tab to go ahead and type in your questions. That way you don't forget and wait until the Q&A section of the presentation. So those will come directly to me, and after Bradley's presentation, I will go ahead and ask those questions of both speakers, and we'll utilize that time that we've set aside to get your questions answered. All right, so at the end of the Q&A section, we will have JP Prendergast, who the Executive Director of Sales for Shift3, will give a quick overview of our company, and then we will want to stay on through the conclusion of his presentation, as I will be making an announcement that I think that you'll want to hear. So let me introduce our keynote speaker. For Jeff Scott, embracing life is not just a lofty ideal, it is his way of life. Jeff has over 25 years of CEO, CIO experience and has been building innovative tech startups in Orange County since 1995. His current focus as CEO and lead technical architect is Software Anywhere, a mission-driven cloud software provider building applications designed to drive 100% user adoption on the Salesforce.com platform. Jeff has spoken at many Salesforce conferences, and this is his 3rd time speaking during this series. Today, he will present chapter 2 of his 2-part series. And just in case some of you may have missed chapter 1, you can find it on the California Trailblazer series website. So with that, I want to hand it over to Jeff Scott.
Thanks, Shanae. Good morning, everybody. Really looking forward to this morning's presentation, getting to do the back half of a series that I put together this last year for teaching digital storytelling through the native and declarative side of Salesforce in the new Lightning UI. So looking forward to this and looking forward to any questions, especially towards the end. As Shanae said, I have been working in this platform for 16 plus years and really have enjoyed this experience. Teaching and mentoring and getting the opportunity to work with you guys in this capacity is definitely where my passion sits. I do play the lead role as a technical architect for our organization, but really focus on business process and the out-of-the-box declarative UI. I'm happy to say I don't code as much anymore, and my team is probably as happy that I'm doing it that way as well. I always like to start my presentations off with my classic anti-safe harbor statement. A lot of you have seen this over the years if you've been to my presentations, and I had to make some modifications for our recent situation because we won't be going to trade shows anytime soon, or at least not in the near future. And that is, I want you guys to be careful, see everything, buy everything, get excited about all the little tricks and things that I'm showing you. But if you've been drinking or are stressed out at home, it's not a good time to sign contracts without actually reading them or being cautious in this particular case. And of course, I have been struggling with canceling my 24-hour fitness membership. And so I found this on the web, and I am definitely done with my 90-day trial of this 2020 experience that we're going through. So if anybody has any tips at the end and they want to share, how do we cancel our membership for 2020 and get to fast forward and move on, I would be very open to that. I think, Janae, we could do a whole presentation or a seminar series around just that alone in this case. Oh, sorry about that. Looks like it didn't hit play on my screen. So all of those great humor slides and things like that, I think you guys just missed, correct? All right.
We can see it now, Jeff.
All right, there you go. There's the anti-safe harbor statement. There is the reveal. You guys will have all this on the presentation. Obviously, the how do we cancel our membership for 2020. But a little bit about our background and our partnership with Shift3. We've been doing productivity apps. We focus on definitely process and automation and technology, but I'm really excited about this series in working with Shift3 and their team. Brad, and who will be presenting later, is really passionate like I am about working on this platform and building solutions. So definitely looking forward to that presentation. But for today, because some of you have been through the chapter 1 portion of this, and some of you have not, I'm going to do a little bit of a recap so that we can get through this quickly, cover what we did in chapter 1, just so you guys have kind of a layout of what's coming into chapters 3 and 4. I'm sorry, sections 301, 401 in this particular case. But the thing is that this is all about Lightning. I was just on a call with a client the other day, and they are still struggling for their final sales organization to get people off of Classic and into Lightning. So I'm hoping at this point you guys are all in with regards to Lightning. There really is no looking back for the clients that I look for working with. They are definitely at a point where there's no more excuses. There shouldn't be really anything in your way, and I hope you guys are fully embracing this. Now, I went through this in my first piece. This has not been an easy experience to get to Lightning. So definitely there's been a lot of confusion and changes in the user interface, and the recycle bin finally got there. And you didn't have to toggle back and forth nearly as much over the last 2 years. But I think at this point, we're there. In 2020, for me, we are completely into Lightning. We've completely converted all of our clients except for a couple of little straggling teams. And everybody is really kind of embracing this. And I definitely struggled over the years. This has not been an easy thing. I was definitely completely believed that Classic was faster, better, and it was just going to be the better thing to keep for the long haul. And you can see here back in 2018, I was still actually not flipping back or struggling to get all the way over. I was flipping back and forth and having that little daily dilemma going on. But I'm happy to say that at this point, there's no way I'm going back. And this is definitely my morning prayer. I get up every morning, I get to actually kind of say this, I put my arms out and I actually think about all the things I'm going to get out of the lightning experience in this particular case, as I've left plastic behind. So I'm going to share this in this presentation with you guys. You can definitely make this your morning prayer if this gets you going to think about lightning. Share this with your users, or even if you want to make a funny version of this and send me your prayer, I would love to see your kind of morning mantra or your way that you actually get your day started in this instance. Of course, I like to make it a little bit more edgy and get everybody to be thinking about this. I do have to be careful. I have to be gentle when I push people over to lightning. You definitely have different people that are comfortable with technology, don't like change. So you need to be kind, but you need to be firm and really kind of say, this is it. We're in the final stages of moving over. Salesforce is starting to shut us off, and they're going to start to actually push us over the line in the next 2 or 3 releases, and to the point where we can't go back, I think. As we get into these types of teaching opportunities, if you want to stay hands-on with me or you want to actually follow along, that's great. But when you get done, there's always little tips and tricks and things I've learned along the way. This is definitely one of the most important pieces when you're actually working in a production environment. Even in sandboxes and things like that, I find that if I disable the caching component of Lightning experience, I have a much better experience when I'm actually designing stuff, refreshing my pages. So before we get too deep into the content today, I'm going to show you where this little feature is because it's a little bit confusing, and then that way you'll have this to be able to enable it in your org. So we're going to switch over and we're going to go into the setup in Lightning. And you guys are going to look for the session settings section here in the sidebar. And when you go to session settings, I don't know why, but this is the only screen that it does this. It starts you at the very bottom of the page, and then you have to actually scroll up in this particular instance and look for the section that says caching. And you'll see this little checkbox here. It usually is enabled, and it's actually doing quite the opposite. So this really will actually clean up your caching issues, not only for the UI, so that when you make changes, you don't have to refresh the page 4 times and then do a pirouette in your head, which is the joke that we had when it first came out. But it also caches the data experience. So often I'll log a call, note, or a meeting, and the page won't actually show that change, or I'll have to refresh a form or edit a form in that particular case. So for those of you who want to turn this off, you can do this in production. You can do this in your sandbox environments, your dev environments as well. So uncheck that box and then go all the way back down again and actually save that setting. So that's definitely one of the big power tricks that I've learned that made this a lot more usable and friendly. But the key to today is about digital storytelling. And often you will meet people that specialize in user experience and graphic design and where to place buttons and content and all of this information on the screen. And it is definitely a skill that you guys can master through a series like this or just practice at the end of the day. And for me, this is the key to the whole thing. We've got to really spend the time to get to know our end users. When somebody is actually pushing back or they're saying it's too cumbersome or it's too difficult, if you're not actually engaging them and looking at what they're doing and getting to know what their day in the life of is, are they comfortable with technology? Are they clicking on the right buttons? Is the interface confusing or probably not even set up properly? Sometimes people will mess up their tabs or they'll make a mess of things that we have to go in and look. So spend the time to get to know your users, and more importantly, watch their process, understand what they're doing to get something accomplished, whether it's creating a trip and getting it approved by their manager, or what metrics they're being measured on, things like that. And if you can get your head around them and you can actually live in their world, which we'll talk about a little bit, then comes this series where you actually have to then take your toolkit, the things that are there with Lightning, the declarative side of Lightning, and really, really figure this out. And we do that through playing with the interface and learning all the components and just experimenting and trying different things. But once you've actually done that and you've actually figured out all the tools and you know the process, you have to start to tell a story. And it's like telling a storyboard for like a feature film or a project that you're going to be doing. And you've got to lay out this kind of digital approach to telling that story and drawing the user in along the way. Most of you who I come across as admins or new admins are afraid that you're going to make a mistake, or you're not going to actually put the right component on the screen or something like that. There are all kinds of tricks to experiment with things, share things with users in that case, and really kind of get this going so you can see what they like and don't like. Ultimately, I want you guys to keep it really simple in this case. So again, this is just kind of a recap, kind of figuring out what we started with in chapter 1, but this is the foundation of how you become a good digital storyteller in this instance. And we often have to look for ways to do that. And so when we look at the interface in here, how we place things and how we organize things can make a huge difference for the users. If they're in sales, maybe the sidebar over here is about them. If they're in service, maybe something else has been about them and is featured so that they can get their job done in this particular case. In my world, featuring things on the homepage that could be very detrimental to a customer, like if a license expired or something lapsed, would be very, very bad. So we'll feature this for people that do this every day. But it's really critical that we learn where to place things. What kinds of things go in the compact layout? What kinds of things do we put on the screen so when somebody looks at this, they can actually see the information that's important? And I'll be sharing some stuff out of my live org that'll show you kind of the day in the life of how I actually work and how I can facilitate some of these things, even for an advanced team who also struggles sometimes from a process perspective. In the last series, we did two things. We actually looked at the homepage and we tore it apart, and we actually used that as a way to start getting comfortable with components and all the different things that Salesforce is actually presenting to us. And we got into things like the utility bar and how do we actually make that available for different apps and different users. So these are definitely some of the beginning points where I feel like if you master the homepage and you understand what you can do with it, it starts to lay the groundwork for the other types of pages that we're going to get into in this case. So take the time, like get in here, actually take your homepage and tear it apart. And I often will go into like a dev org, my Trailhead Playground org, or a sandbox, and I'll just go behind the scenes and actually just start editing pages without really any regard for what's there and what the purpose of the page is. And I'll just start to drag in components like the accordion component or the tab component that recently came available for your homepage, for example. And so there I can actually put things like campaigns together, maybe feature that for the marketing team. I can have a support page and I can put in cases, and I can start to use tabs on my homepage to actually organize this here. So for example, I may want to add a tab for the sales organization. And so I can add a sales tab here, and I could take the quarterly performance chart down here that is predominantly for sales, and I could drop that into there so that people that are not in sales won't see that information. And so there's all kinds of tricks to mastering the homepage, even to the point where you can have a single homepage for a very complex organization. You could actually do some really creative things. So in series chapter 1, we got into some of these types of things that you guys can play with to really make it look good for your homepage. And that's kind of the fundamentals that actually gets us going for the rest of the stuff that we do. Oops. The utility bar is a really powerful piece to go with it. So take a look at that, learn how to customize it. We can do all kinds of things with the utility bar as well. The second part that we went into in chapter 1 was the actual app page itself. And I look at this as the end of the standard object tab. I personally, if we go into our demo org, we'll see all the classic tabs for all the objects up here. So campaigns, leads, accounts, contacts, opportunities. Those are all the standard out-of-the-box tabs. And when a user actually goes to something like campaigns, the only thing that they see is either a list view that they've actually pinned, or they actually have to go through and sift through all the list views. Now, this is convenient because there's only 4, but if you go into a regular org, you might actually have 10, 20, 30 list views, and it's really confusing for the user to try to figure out which one am I going to get the most value out of in this case. So we went over that in great detail, and you'll notice here, if I go to my campaigns page, it's not the standard campaigns page. It's actually a lightning page in which I actually dragged in components from a mix and match of things. So I could bring in different list views that are very specific and put them in a very specific order as well to tell people what they need to get out of this page and what they're looking for to make it really convenient. So top level campaigns, we're reorganizing right now our campaigns and our hierarchies based on the fact that we're not traveling, or trips are changing, or events are changing. So obviously you have all this to work with, but this is a lot easier for a user to be able to just go to a single page and do things. You still have global actions, so they can create a new event or create a new campaign from this page. You do have the ability to control the buttons on each of these individual list views. Searching is available. So this really makes it nice for someone to be able to come in and actually see this. But often I will need to point their attention to other things, like a Google spreadsheet that I've embedded here on this page. And so they can go out there and collaborate on that Google spreadsheet. So I want them to see this. But we talked about the other technique, which we're going to use in chapter 2 here, the ability to actually put in rich text fields onto those pages as well, and actually put documentation together in one place. So the whole notion here is that through digital storytelling, we can start to take the pieces that are there out of the box and rethink how we use those pages for a variety of things. And you'll notice up here at the top, I have accounts by tier, I have sales, sales operations, all my renewals. I even have my invoicing and AR management in here, my project management strategy. So all of these tabs at the top are actual Lightning pages that actually mix and match and tell different digital stories. And this is what we went over in great detail. But this is the foundation to learning how to become a great digital storyteller. Start with your homepage, dive into the actual Lightning page experience, and start putting together stories for your users, sales managers, things like that. And I often hear people do some classic techniques like, oh, I'm just going to go build a dashboard and that will handle everything for my sales manager. And that's true. That's really good that you can put a dashboard together. But I like to be able to see a page where I might want to interact with the data. I might want to see the homepage and actually have different things that I can actually work with here in one place. And I want to be able to put a report chart or a graph or something like that in there. Whereas in a dashboard, you can only do the components from a dashboard. You can't do inline documentation techniques and things like that. So for those of you that want to go back and see that, that's a great foundational setup for what we're about to dive into. And today we're going to dive into chapter 2, which gets into 2 of the more advanced techniques that I hope you guys will get a lot of value out of. And I previewed this a little bit in the last keynote, and that is the record page, the page where people probably spend the majority of their time in Salesforce, and where classic Salesforce users complained that I have to click here, open this window, click open another tab, and they just get lost in all kinds of navigational issues and things like that. This was my personal breakthrough in really trying to figure out what could I do for the long haul with Lightning. I had my first breakthrough with the app page itself, and that was really cool, and I got that all organized, and it really helped me kind of see the light. But when I really got into this concept of sticking a user onto a single record page, and today we're going to go over the opportunity page, and we're going to go over some of the other pages that we deal with here. And we're going to look at how do you actually keep a user in a single record and give them access to all of the information that they need at any one time. And if we really look at this and we want to look at an opportunity itself, then we can actually say, well, I want to see the account details, or I want to see where was this opportunity sourced from, and do I have a renewal opportunity if I'm in the recurring revenue business, or do I have a quick document that I have put together for a sales plan? So these are the types of things that we're going to look at here in this case. And we're going to then look at a case page, and we're going to also look at the same information and just see what we can actually get out of it in one place. But it's not just about internal data, it's also about external data as well. So let's dive out of here and go right into the interface behind the scenes. So I'm going to start here with the Shea Therapeutic Writing Facility. And this is a place where I can look at an account page, I can see all the stuff that's going on, I can see what's in my pipeline, I can see what I have for budgets, I can see all of this great information about this account. But often I want to drill into an actual opportunity itself. And with the times right now, things are changing. I think my budgets are shifting, their budgets are shifting, their organization is changing rapidly, and I need to go very quickly through repositioning all the opportunities that I thought were in place and redo my budgets for the year. And the last thing I want to do is have to remember, where did I put their account plan and where did I put their budget that I shared with them, and where's all that information? And what's really nice is I can actually go into, I'll just take one of the ones that we recently did. I can go into an opportunity record and I can sit here on this page and I can do all kinds of things. And as a sales rep, I don't really want to have to leave here. I want to stay here as much as I possibly can and get all of the information organized in one place. And I like to do things when I do my digital storytelling where I take, for example, the path settings and the objects that support path, or if I put a path together for any custom object, and I'll use that kind of as a good visual indicator. But I also use this as a placeholder so that I actually can put tabs up here at the top and actually have a full screen experience. So one of the things when we get into digital storytelling that we have to understand is, how is a page constructed? Am I only given the detail page and a sidebar, or can I actually get more creative with and organize the stuff at the top? And the short answer is yes. I wanted a particular experience that we all see in Lightning, where I've got a classic detail page in the sidebar. But I really did want to open up this other series of tabs up here and maybe build a success plan for Quip, or look at their account plan in a Google Sheet. And that's where I got into it a little bit. I was like, oh, that would be really nice if we just put the tab set up here. And so I started to play with my page layouts. And I really kind of said, all right, let's take it apart, top down, left, right, and try to figure out what we can do with the page. Obviously, most of the pages will start out with the header highlight panel component up here. And in the last series, we talked about different ways to customize this with the compact layout. But here's where I actually put in a tab set, and I put it here because then I could put my path and my stages here, and that keeps it all closed and compact for the user so they're not overwhelmed. And then I actually started to put things like the sales docs tab and a series of sub tabs. Now, we talked about one of the slides about keeping it simple in this case. I have a rule of thumb, and that is I will allow my designers to actually put together a tab series, perfectly fine, and then I only allow for one more series of tabs within that. And that's where, I mean, you could definitely get carried away. I can actually do this, and I've played with it until I got so out of control I couldn't follow it anymore. I can do tabs with inside of tabs with inside of tabs, and you can imagine how your users are going to scream when you tell them it's on the third sub tab of the second tab of the fourth tab down on the left corner. They're not going to do that. We want our users to actually just be able to look at the page, say, great, there's all my sales documents, open up that category, look right through here in that kind of situation, and see what's available to them. So if you are using tabs and you use these techniques to get a full screen experience at this upper section here, just be very careful to keep it really simple. And feel free to use the tab naming convention to really articulate, what is it? Is it a sales plan? Is it an account plan? What are these things? So that your users don't have to go asking for help and saying, what is that again? And why would I use that? So that's one of my favorite techniques there, is to use let's leave here, use the tab collection as a way on a detail page to organize all kinds of information up here at the top, which we're going to go into each of these tabs and break them down, and I'm going to show you some cool techniques. Now, today we have the detail section, of course, and that is what is available to us, where it's still compatible with Classic and Lightning. And I've started to see the previews and understand what's coming of the new Lightning components that will allow you to put in fields and do little clusters of things, which is great. We're going to get to completely reconstruct the way this page looks in the near future. But if you notice, I not only have a set of tabs up here for my full screen experience, so I can look at things, but then I also actually have a series of tabs down here as well. And some of these things are more related down here to the detail section, things that are about the actual record itself, and then all of its related records. But I know you guys are familiar with how frustrating it was to go to something like the related tab here and then have to hover over all these things to figure out what is what. in this particular case. And users don't like to do that. I'll put it there because often I'll have some stuff there that I want to get to as an admin. But what I'm really trying to figure out when I'm creating my story for a user on this record is how do I get them access to the stuff as fast as I can? So for example, the details section, it's great. Then I also will actually give them access to the products and services section here. So maybe I'll take a couple of related lists and drop them into this page as a tab. Then I might actually take some sales operations related fields and I'll pull in fields from the opportunity and I'll pull in fields from the account and I'll mix and match on maybe one of these tabs with some different techniques. And then I'll pull in finance related stuff, activity related, and all the other things that are needed here. It is possible to do things that are duplicative. We learned this in the last session as well. So I could have activities here. I could actually have activities and chatter here on the sidebar. So you're not limited to putting these things in one place. You can put them on different sidebars and be redundant with them as well. But the key here is actually taking from the related section and anywhere else that there is good data that's going to tell a story, and it lets us put it into the page in an organized fashion that helps the user focus very quickly. Now, I often will use everything that I can get my hands on. I'll use formula fields here to visually tell the user that they're in good shape, that they've done things properly. I will use a tab up here, for example, and I will embed something like GridBuddy, which is one of my favorite pieces that I use so that I can look at all the pricing and all the things that I need to see all in one grid and do a lot of edits to not only the opportunity, but also the children records as well. So take what you have available to you. If you have tools like GridBuddy or other third-party tools, you can definitely make these pages a lot more interesting for the user. I often will take the sidebar over here too and do a bunch of things to not only make this story about this more relevant, but then also give them access to some other fields and other screens that are important too. This is one of my favorite techniques for the opportunity, which hopefully will set things in motion for you on other records that you can do things with. If you're setting up an opportunity, obviously knowing who the key contact roles are is important. So I usually will feature that, and I'll be able to go in here and I'll look for someone. I'll take Wallace Chan, and I'll make him the decision maker, and he said yes, so we're good there. So I often will use the things that are available to me out of the box, like contact roles, to put those kinds of things into place. But if I also needed to have who's the primary contact and who's the billing contact and who's the signing contact, because from here I have to make sure I tell the primary contact that we've sent an invoice off. I need to have somebody sign for this. I need to know who the invoices are going to go to from a billing perspective. This is a very classic technique of having lookup fields here that you guys can use. And we had this in Classic, and it was really easy to fill these in and do that. But you often had to hover on them. You had to click on them to go see Wallace's information or Brent's information. And a lot of times they will call and say, hey, I have a new email address, or my phone number has changed, or maybe you're missing information. And this is the first time I realized that I don't want to have to sit here and hover in Lightning, which this doesn't really do much for me. It's actually really confusing and frustrating. I don't want to have to actually click on Wallace's information and go change his contact details and then have to try to remember how to go back again, because we don't have the sidebar with the recent records like we had in the past. So navigating and having a user get lost is very frustrating. But there's this really great technique over here where I can actually embed and put in a related record action. And I can actually have Wallace's information here, and I can actually update his information while I'm actually still sitting on my opportunity. And so this is, if I go back to my slide, this is the beginning of sitting here on my record page and saying, okay, not only can I look at account details, but I could look at contact details and other things that are related to this record. And so in that upper quadrant, I'm thinking about all the different things that I can pull in. So I've got the primary contact, I've got the billing contact here, and I've got the signing contact. And what I really like about this as well is that you can actually use this to remove that information. Oh, I can't modify this because I've locked my opportunity. That's my own protection from making my own mistakes. But you can you can actually remove and update this information. And when you fill this in, it actually fills in this information for you and vice versa. So it makes it really convenient in this case. Now, a tip. Out of the box, when we actually design these things and we drag them in, they usually will say something like just primary contact or billing contact. I will do things like modifying the label here so that they actually know that they can click here to view. It's not always intuitive that the users know that this is a hyperlink, for example, that could actually take me somewhere. So when I'm looking, when I'm looking at my tab names and I'm looking at my labels and all the things that I'm experimenting with in my toolkit, I have to be careful here and help the user kind of navigate. So this is a cool technique where I can actually just edit the page here. And all I'm doing in this particular case to make that sidebar come to life is I'm actually have a tab set here. And I'm taking this control and I'm just modifying the header label so that it's not the default out of the box. So anywhere you can actually put little things like that in place, you'll find that your users will appreciate that over time. And once they learn how to do one, then they'll start to actually realize they can use that to click everywhere. We could spend 2 hours, by the way, on this detail page. There are so many techniques that we can actually come up with here to keep the user engaged in one place. Notes, quip, all kinds of related records can be featured on the sidebars in these different tabs and things like that. But one of the things to really demonstrate this whole center of the universe thing is to be thinking about other types of data that are really important to the user. Obviously outside external data like quip documents, Google documents, even lucid chart diagrams, which I'm going to show you later. There's all kinds of things we can embed in that page. And again, the user is sitting there saying, I can do all of these things in one place. And there are two other techniques that are really important. And that is this. I can go to the account page and I can go absorb all kinds of fields and things like that. And on this page, I have tons of fields. I've got sections organized and I've got it all labeled where I can see everything. But there's sections of these fields that would be really cool that the user who's in an opportunity would want to see. And they would want to be able to edit them or update them and things like that. And so it's one thing to be able to know where they all sit and scroll and scroll and scroll and actually do all this revenue planning and details and all the stuff down here. But that's frustrating for a user to have to look at all that and remember where it is. So one of the greatest techniques that you can do when you're sitting here on this record is you can bring in related chatter actions from the account object and actually organize them. And these are set up in such a way that I have a collection of fields from maybe one section of the page. And so I can look at different collections of fields here and actually do this and get them organized. And I love this because you can actually edit these records or these sets of fields here, and these are going to do updating directly on the account record itself. And I don't ever have to leave this opportunity. And if I'm planning for upside for the year of what's going to be changing in their budget, maybe I want to see this. Maybe I want to organize myself and look at the sales plan and be able to make all these decisions without ever leaving this page. That's kind of neat. Now, the way you do this is you actually build a chatter action on the account object, which is not very intuitive. So if you're actually down on the opportunity and you want to grab something from an account or a contact, you actually build the action on the account object itself. And then you can actually embed it here and relate it to this opportunity. So in order to do that, we have to go into setup behind the scenes, go to the object manager, find the related object like the account object. Remember that that is actually in the buttons, links, and actions section. And in here, we can actually find all kinds of chatter actions and things that we need. And obviously that's a lot of work. There's a ton of stuff I've put in here, and that's a lot of clicks. So I'm going to show you one of my favorite techniques for if you are a lazy but very organized and proficient Salesforce admin. And I say that carefully. When I look at this, you guys will see this little thing down here in light gray, so it's not distracting from the user. I actually have a link to view the chatter action, and I have a link to edit the layout of this action directly here in the page. This is not something out of the box. There's no code required. just a little bit of creativity on how to actually make this page proficient or efficient, not only for my user, but for me as the admin, because I'll be in a meeting and somebody's like, hey, can we add another field here? Can we do that? And I want to do it quickly and walk away. So what I've done here is I've actually put a rich text field in place underneath my component. So it's one thing to be able to put the tab together here, having the related action right here, but then I actually put a little rich text field down here, and I'll put the hyperlinks to viewing the chatter action and editing the layout. Those are the two things that I do on a regular basis. And then I'll use a filter technique and make this filtered only to someone who is actually a config admin, which is a technique where I put a little checkbox on their user record just so I can actually filter out a whole bunch of noise that the typical user doesn't need to see. So that's kind of a neat technique to make it easy once you put these pages together to not have to remember all those clicks and all those steps to go and do that. So here I can just go to this page and I look at this and I go, oh, I want to make a change to this. And all I have to do is actually click here. It'll pop me into a new tab, takes me directly to the chatter action that I want to work on. And I can do all kinds of things with this from here. And again, I can edit the layout from here. I can make changes quickly to the fields, drop a new field in there, reorganize this, which I had to do earlier today, save it and walk away. So this is definitely one of the greater techniques where you can put in the related chatter action. You can give yourself a cool little hyperlink set here so that you can get to it quickly and make changes. And now I've got this ability to not only look at the opportunity, but anything from the account page, anything from the related contacts that I've linked in this particular case. And so if we step back, anything that has a lookup field and anything that has a direct relationship to this record can start to be pulled in. So that's a really cool thing to do. And so this is how I sit and I actually watch the end user work, and he's like, oh, I click over here and then a new tab opens and I do this and then I go over here and then I've lost and then I got to search for the opportunity again, and it just goes on and on and on. And I try to get rid of all of that noise. The next piece of this though is a little bit more advanced. So this is relatively easy, my opportunity record, contacts, and accounts. But in my world, I actually sell recurring software. And if I actually go here, I'm going to pull down one of my, pull down one of my recent opportunities. And I recently sold a software contract to a company called Gas Station TV. And I'm sitting here on this screen, again, doing my job. The opportunity's been closed, but I want to go and look and say, where did this opportunity come from? Now I could go back to the account, I could go looking through all the opportunities and try to figure that out. But in this case here, I can actually go to the source opportunity. And this is going to be my related opportunity that I linked up behind the scenes so that I could say, oh, well, this opportunity was created from this original source opportunity. And I can see what that one was and how much that one was worth versus how much this one is worth. And I can see that things have been changing. So not only can I actually look up, but I can actually create links to other records that are related to this record through Process Builder and different techniques. And I can make that available to the user. And it happens all the time where I want to go back and look at where we were last year versus this year. So think about that. You can actually have backwards looking records. So it's kind of a leapfrog strategy. And then you could also have forward looking records. Now here, I don't have my renewal opportunity set up just yet. And this is where I actually want to kind of give you the last piece of the digital storytelling series for a record page. And that is this. When a user closes a deal, wins a deal, there may be business logic that is needed to set up the renewal opportunity for next year or set up a new record for the future, all kinds of tricks like that. And that is, I will take all this page layout information and I'll keep it the way that it is. But over here, this is my favorite window for telling a story and actually getting people motivated. I will actually start to put in little flow wizards or lightning components and things like that that will prompt the user to do the next step. For example, here, I need to create a new renewal opportunity. And so I'm going to just go ahead and hit next. And this is going to do all of its work. And then I'm going to hit finish. And that component drops off and puts itself away. But now what's really nice is if I refresh the page is that the renewal opportunity not only was created, but it's also been linked in this particular case here. Using that same technique, being very consistent, renewal opportunity, I can go view it. So if I'm in a situation like this, where I'm either in sales or the baton pass has been made to sales operations, I can actually keep a user in one place and collaborate very quickly through chatter and different things on a single record, allowing those people to actually do their job. And this sidebar over here, I've got all kinds of wizards. I've got things that say, go ahead and create an invoice. I've got things that say, create a renewal opportunity. Or maybe I'm missing information on the account, so I will prompt them over there to fill in some things. So when we look at the page and how we can actually use it to tell a story, it's important to know how a person processes the page. It's kind of a top-down, left-right experience. They're very visual, so they want to see where they are in a process. They need to get to the meat of this opportunity pretty quickly, and I want to keep that organized. In this case, I want to give them the ability to clean up their dirty data, which I clearly haven't done here, so I'm going to do that. So I can do that, and then I'm going to use this little sidebar over here, like I said, to start injecting all kinds of things. And I'll show you some different techniques in the future on how we can do that. But they're wizards, help prompts, text tricks and things like that will tell them that they're missing information. So you don't need to write a bunch of code. You don't need to write a bunch of Lightning components. You can just use the dynamic page layout, filtering, and all of the techniques that are right here within the single record page to tell your story. This is a lot. This is a big topic. This is a big experience for you as an admin. But you can really start to bring in a lot of good data and navigational control in your story so that that sales user cannot complain anymore about getting the information they need or making it easy to update the page. That can be true for anything. It doesn't really matter. It can be an opportunity, it could be a case, it could be all kinds of different things that you would want to sit in and look in this instance. So think about that, get inside of the head of your user, watch them work, and try to see what you can do. All right, I'm down to the last segment here, the 401 topic. And this one is a little bit of a mind bender, but I hope this is the one that actually provokes a lot of creativity, and you go back to the whiteboard, you go back to experimenting and taking risks and doing things that are just outside of the box. And I will say this, if you guys get through this topic with me, have ideas, I would love to hear those ideas. I would love for you guys to send feedback or share your idea so I can incorporate it into another teaching opportunity and share your creativity with other people. But this is one of the biggest breakthroughs that I had with Lightning, where I could actually break all the rules. And I really like to do this with just out of the box declarative techniques, no code, and see what I can do without having to rethink things or reinvent the wheel or create custom anything. So if we go back over here, I am going to go into my org, go back to my homepage, and let's set up the stage for this. Down here in my utility bar, I actually have a situation here where I have my departments, and I have my marketing department in this particular case. And I'm going to close this up so you can see this for a second. And so I was really looking at this and I was like, I want to build kind of a place where my teams can collaborate. They can share information. I don't want to go and buy an intranet tool, and I don't want to put them out in Google and out in Lucidchart. I need to get them into one centralized home. And I think it's frustrating because we often look at the object model, leads, accounts, contacts, opportunities, and all the stuff that is here in a classic Salesforce design. And we think that we have to use all these things for what they were designed for out of the box. But that's not the case. It's actually kind of cool. We can use record types, page layout tricks, all kinds of things to start rethinking the way that we looked at this. And so I was actually looking at this, which was, how do I build an intranet page? And how would I build a nice place for people to collaborate and start to share documents and contacts and all kinds of things? And I started thinking about the types of things that I needed for my intranet page. And all of a sudden, I realized that the account object had a lot of the information that was needed to pull this off. And like, why would I go build a new intranet document page? Why would I go put up SharePoint? Why would I go do all these things when I just needed something lightweight to organize some basic information? And if I had all these tools available to me, what could I do? Obviously, I could take my Lightning pages and I could put dashboard and inline help components and all kinds of things together. But this one is actually the breakthrough. And that is this. This is nothing more than the account object with a record type called department. And so I thought about it for a second. I was like, well, you know what? It's interesting. On the account object, there is a component or a related list called the related contacts. And I wanted to take all the people that I might collaborate in this particular case with. So Janae and I collaborate on stuff for Shift 3 when it comes to the event series or other things like that. And I was like, well, why would I want to write a whole contacts list and all that kind of stuff in this particular case? And if I went to Janae's record, I would want to see the different places that she was connected to in this case. And so I wanted to show that she was connected to my marketing department. And so how do I tell who the primary contact is for the marketing department? Or how do I add things on this page that are relevant? And so you'll notice when I load this page, it actually pulls up a playbook. It's a piece of a marketing document that the team is collaborating on to try to figure out where we're putting stuff and how we're reorganizing our organization. And I wanted to make that available. So when they load this account department, marketing department page, I can actually see a document from outside here. I can actually put up some branding strategy information here in a Google Sheet. And so there's all kinds of things that I can actually see that the marketing department would want to collaborate on. And it's not that they can't go find the document over in Lucidchart or the Google Sheet, but I don't know how many of you guys have often been in meetings and you're like, where did you get that? Why didn't you share that with me? How do I get to that document again? And it drives me crazy navigating in all those different places. So I try to use the tools that I have available or some third-party apps to make this kind of stuff come to life. And at the same time, I want to have a chatter conversation featured in this case. I want to see who all the team members are. So there's, again, that related contact section. Maybe the marketing department is looking at a report of different metrics with app users and things like that that are important. So I want to make sure that they can get to that information. You know, notes, groups, files, all the stuff that's relevant to having a nice little collaborative page here. Again, this is just the account object with a record type called department. And it's got everything that I get to see. I've got the ability to look at Software Anywhere and then all of its related companies and things like that or departments. So it's got account hierarchy capabilities that I can actually see things with. It's got the ability for me to look at this and say, wait a second. So all I needed to do this was an account object, a record type of department, a page layout, and check out my detailed page layout. It's really tiny and no one ever really uses it here. I've got my primary contact. I've got a Google Doc ID, a Lucidchart ID, or other tools that I might use that I want to embed. But really, nobody ever cares about this. This is just there for me to be able to update this page. But I can now look at this and use this as a place to collaborate in one instance around a department. And again, I used everything out of the box that I could think about. I was experimenting with account teams. Is that the right way to do it? And the answer was no, because I, in this situation, wanted to have contacts from outside my organization. So account teams didn't work, so I didn't want to use that. But so I used related contacts. If I wanted to have security, for example, I could then implement account teams so that I could actually add people from a security perspective. So you can make this a non-secure intranet available to everybody, or you could actually use some of the techniques out of the box to make accounts private and then actually add people to the team and give them different rights to this. You know, maybe they're allowed to edit, maybe they're allowed to view, things along those lines. So this is just one example where we can actually take the out-of-the-box experience, start to rethink about it, and rethink it, and actually organize and create solutions with the tools that are already available. You would typically look at this and say, oh yeah, it totally makes sense. I'm going to use accounts and contacts for my intranet page. But for me, it actually worked out really well, and it helps me keep everything in one place. When we look at the Lightning app page, the dashboard and help, and the documentation information, there's all kinds of stuff that we can do with that. in here. And in my org, I've got campaign lightning pages and all these different pages up here where I'm mixing and matching things to create those stories. The cases page, I've seen some really wild support solutions where you're on a support side and the case side, and you're thinking about what can I use this for. There's many different things that you could use the cases object for that are not just support and ticket related. And then of course you guys can actually embed your ideas in here. So I would love your feedback. I would love your ideas. I'd be happy to collaborate with you to share those ideas. The Shift 3 team has some great team members that know how to do this kind of stuff out of the box. It's a really great opportunity for you to take the value of what you're getting and actually be able to just use it to tell these incredible digital stories. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. This is a really cool way to kind of graduate from chapter 1. If you want to go back and look at that, these are some techniques that I think you could just play with and put into place almost overnight without any code, without anything crazy. Just learning some of the basic components and the basic filtering techniques. You guys can consolidate page layouts, tell stories, and actually really engage your users in a different way. So thanks for the opportunity to do this, and look forward to questions at the end.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. Just a reminder before I introduce our next speaker, please feel free to ask any questions that you may have for Jeff and or Bradley in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you see that there on your screen, you'll want to go over to that and go ahead and type in whatever questions you might have, and I will be able to ask those during our Q&A session, which will be right after Bradley is done with his presentation. So with that, our next speaker is Bradley Norris, a Salesforce certified administrator from Fresno working for Shift 3 Technologies. Brad has experience in most aspects of Salesforce administration, from declarative building to project management. He's also flexed his web development background by creating custom Visualforce web pages. In addition to his Salesforce administration certification, Bradley also holds his Salesforce Sales Cloud cert. Aside from his experience as a hands-on admin, Brad has also had the opportunity recently to instruct a Salesforce for Beginners course at our GeekWise Academy, as well as present a breakout session at SenCal Dreamin', which occurred in January earlier this year. When he's not managing Salesforce projects, Brad can be found watching, playing, and coaching soccer, as well as a myriad of other outdoor hobbies. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad to give you some insight on Lightning Web Components.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeanette. That was a great introduction. I think I can skip kind of my first slide here and where I brag about myself, because you kind of already did that for me. But as Jeanette said, I am a Salesforce admin, a project manager, and I've been working in the Salesforce arena for about a year now on a bunch of different projects. And my presentation today is called Cody by Nature. You down with LWCs? Yeah, you know me. I like to get kind of long and punny and convoluted with my titles, and this one is no different. So today, some of the takeaways that you're going to have from this presentation is an ability to know what a Lightning Web Component is, how they differ from Aura components, how they are made. In addition to that, we'll see some use cases and some examples of Lightning Web Components. And then we'll also have a nice little discussion about the Lightning design system. So what are Lightning Web Components? Let's take a little journey back in time here. Back in 2014, you remember Pharrell, he was telling us that he was happy, and the Lego movie was informing us that everything was awesome. And this really set the stage for Salesforce to launch the Lightning Component Framework. The Lightning Component Framework was supported by the Aura programming framework, which made building large-scale client applications more feasible with its component-driven model. But before we get too into the weeds here, let's take a minute to kind of break down some of these words for those of you that no habla tech Spaniel. Number one, what is a framework? A framework It's a platform for developing software applications. It provides a foundation on which developers can build programs for a specific platform. Frameworks can provide predefined classes, predefined functions that can all be utilized without coding a whole project from scratch. Frameworks like APIs can handle a lot of the more tedious development work so that developers can focus more on building software and making the world a better place and less on the tiny little things that you're going to do on every project. In a previous role before I started working with Salesforce, I used the Angular framework to develop apps. And when you spin up a new Angular project, it automatically pulls in all your dependencies and sets up your file structure and creates all these standard files that you'll need to start building. It's a great way to save you hours and maybe sometimes even days setting up your project. You know, Angular projects have thousands of files built into them right from the start, and I would have no idea how to do that from scratch. So it's great that a framework provides all those things for me. What is the component-driven model? What the component-driven development is, it's kind of a style of development that focuses on modularity, breaking up the larger goal of development into smaller chunks that can be built and then used and reused later to save time. If you are building a website and you just built a great looking nav bar, you don't want to have to build that over and over again, starting from scratch every time you need a nav bar. If you make it a single component that you can reuse anytime, you know, if you work with a team of developers that maybe they want to follow the same style as you, they can all access that nav bar as well once you've made it into a component that is accessible within your framework. Now, everyone has access to that nav bar. It only needs to be built once and it'll look the same every time to give you a little bit of consistency. So, component-driven model, frameworks, what does this all have to do with Lightning Web Components? Well, we fast forward to 2019 and this year, and the web stack has made leaps and bounds improvements on how well and how quickly we can spin up web applications. It was only natural that Salesforce development would make a similar jump as well. So we said au revoir to Aura and bonjour to Lightning Web Components. And Lightning Web Components are a stack of modern lightweight frameworks built on the latest web standards. So I mentioned earlier that I am an analogy enthusiast, so we'll start off with a nice little analogy about development here. Imagine if you're coding like a website or an app from scratch. Writing code is like building a house. And if you're just using standard web languages, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, straight up coding like that is like taking the clay to form bricks and chopping wood to make the beams and then putting it all together to build a house. It's great. You can make some really cool custom homes, but let's be honest, you needed that house yesterday and you don't want to spend a lot of money on it. So now Aura comes along and says, guess what? I've already made the bricks for you. I've already carved out the lumber. All you got to do is build the house now. That's fantastic. We just saved a ton of time on manufacturing. Thank you so much, Aura. We'll love you forever. We'll never forget you. But then one day you're walking down the street with Aura and you see the new hotness, Lightning Web Components. And they're all like, bricks are cool, but what if I told you I have pre-built roofs and walls and couches and garages and refrigerators and sinks and so much more? Now you're building houses at the speed of lightning. And even better, the Lightning design system has already matched the paint job and the wood. So you don't have to think about color schemes or whether or not the rug is going to match the cabinets. So that's really kind of the layman's version of development and how we've moved along. But what does it actually mean in technical terms? What it means is improved performance due to native browser compatibility, as well as code chunking for faster development, better adoption of modern web stack standards to cut out the mid-layer stack translation process. Creating a Lightning Web Component no longer requires the end user to download a JavaScript file and wait for the engine to compile before rendering the component, and this will lead to faster loading times. We actually get to use ECMAScript 7, so that's fantastic. And Lightning Web Components can be included in Aura, so old components can be improved upon without complete rebuilds, and we'll talk a little more about all of that. starting with why you should use web components. It's a bunch of reasons. Number one, we'll start with the need for speed. One issue that users sometimes like to complain about a lot is the speed at which pages load. A great way to address this concern is by using Lightning Web Components, which take considerably less time to load. If you have users in your org that are maybe reluctant to use new technologies, and I'm sure we've all seen those people, the last thing you want to do is give them another reason like slow loading pages or something like that to complain about in your CRM. So using Lightning Web Components will cut down that load time and get your users to their data quickly and more efficiently. And how does that work? Well, Lightning Web Components speak your language. And by your language, I mean the internet's language. Abstraction layers are a necessary evil depending on what kind of framework you're using to build your components. As your org lives on the internet, it must also follow the basic rules of web standards. So coding with frameworks like Angular are great, and they're a quick way to build robust apps and components. But as soon as they hit the web, they need to be converted to the languages that the internet understands. That's kind of a simple explanation. If you use a framework that isn't built on standard web languages, your browser has to pop on its trusty decoder ring and translate what it's seeing into usable code. Well, the good thing about Lightning Web Components is that they're built on standard web languages, HTML, JavaScript, CSS. These don't need that aforementioned conversion process, so it just instantly loads. Number three, familiar faces. I think I can speak for most developers when I say that HTML and CSS and JavaScript are the building blocks of web development. Beginner coders typically learn these languages first as they translate to the web so seamlessly. So building custom code for your org, it's not an impossible task, but it does require that you learn some new tricks, which can cause a bit of a ramp up period. I know when I first started working with Salesforce, I was a developer. I could build a fast, beautiful custom application in Angular. I was super proud of the work that I was doing. And then when I started working in Salesforce, I was asked to code my first Visualforce page, and it probably took me about a week, maybe longer, just to build a simple form. So it was really frustrating. And time is valuable, and so you can save a lot of time by simply using coding languages that you already know, instead of learning a new language and then building with that. If you're just using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that you already know, that'll make things that much easier. The transition from developing for the web and developing for Lightning Web Components is much simpler and can cut down on that development time for your team. Number four, don't reinvent the wheel. Like I mentioned before, Lightning Web Components can be built in chunks to speed up future development. If you want to build a component that displays a path with a simplified detail section and maybe an embedded chart or something, you don't need to start from scratch every single time. These components can be built separately and then reused as often as you want to cut time off of development. You'll kind of see later in our hands-on demo, like if you already built a custom component that displays a contact's photo, don't build it again next time you need to use that. Just reference the component you already made, slot it into your new custom component, and it's available to use. Even more good news on that front is that Lightning Web Components are backwards compatible with Aura components. So if you're already using an awesome Aura component that you built a few years back and you love it to death, but you just want to add a few things to it, that's perfectly fine. No need to start from scratch. No need to build it all from the beginning. Your new Lightning Web Component can be added to your old Aura component with no compatibility issues. Lastly, consistency is key. Because Lightning Web Components utilize the Lightning design system, which we'll talk about a little bit later, your components can look and feel like they have been a part of your org from the beginning. Utilizing predetermined Lightning styles makes the transition from component to component seamless, and also cuts down on how much time you have to use custom styling to get all those edges and those colors all pixel perfect. And we'll kind of move on to some examples here, just so you can see some of these in action. This first example is a simple hello world. If you have done any kind of development, you're familiar with the hello world. There's a few different examples in here, starting with the first one's just showing you, we can put this on your page. There's a two-way binding hello world there, where if you wanted to change the word world in hello world, you can do it instantly right through an input field that you just type in. You can use JavaScript expressions to, capitalize automatically any data that's punched into a field. Conditional rendering, where you can use a checkbox to show or hide details if you wish. And then on the right-hand side there, some examples of some loops. So you can loop through an array of, say, contacts or accounts to display all of those. So it's pretty simple. The next one is this was a PDF viewer that was built into Salesforce, so that directly inside your record page, you can kind of see these tabs down here at the bottom where you can view PDFs on a specific record. This one's really cool, just to kind of show that a Lightning Web Component doesn't always have to be some UI element that is put on your page to use. They can also be elements that are kind of hidden in the background. This is a custom toast notes that you can make and call upon. You can make these as Lightning Web Components and call them in certain actions, so that you have custom toast notifications popping up. And you won't see that anywhere in your org until you complete that process that shows a success message. So even though you've built something, it doesn't necessarily have to be in front of your face all the time. Lastly, this is a cool example of an org that is tracking mutual funds, and they have an app page here where they've basically displayed all of their funds and built a filter section on the right, so they can filter by any kind of text that they type in there, specific fields. They can have these slider bars you see for the return rates, and kind of move and adjust those things to show how many funds fit into those parameters. This is great because then you don't have to search all over for things. You can see multiple results that fit into a certain category that you were looking for, all without having to fiddle around with some filters and refreshing pages. So these are some cool examples, but obviously the sky's the limit on what you want to build. So those are all kind of examples of why you should use Lightning Web Components, but it's important to ask, what are some of the cons? Why shouldn't you use Lightning Web Components? And the answer for this is pretty basic and pretty obvious. If you don't need to use it, don't use it. If you have an idea in mind that you want to see on the screen, and you've drawn out your wireframe and you've taken it to your developer and you say, build this for me, have you really thought through whether or not that needs to be done through code? Because not everything does. A vast majority of customizations needed for your workflows can typically be done without touching any code in Salesforce, and that should always be your line of thinking. You saw earlier with some of Jeff's app pages, you can do a lot of stuff declaratively inside Salesforce without touching code. So there's not always a need to jump right to code if you want something custom. Custom code should always be kind of your last line of defense when building in customizations in Salesforce. Think long and hard about how your mission can be accomplished using those out-of-the-box tools. And if you still can't see it working, try floating the idea past some other teammates or an online forum or a community group or something like that. I always like to throw it out there to a bunch of people, cast a wide net, and see if someone can poke a hole in what I'm doing before I really commit to something. And once I've exhausted all of my resources, then I can turn to code. If you rely too heavily on coding solutions in Salesforce, you might be setting yourself up for issues down the road. Say if you have some developer turnover and the person who built that custom component is now gone, maybe somebody else would have to take a lot of time to figure out what they built to be able to fix it. And maybe some changes in releases might affect it. You don't want to have to go in and keep maintaining those web components. So like I said, always think long and hard on whether or not you need it, because it might not always be needed. I had a friend of mine who was running a company, and they built a community for their clients to view certain records and details about those records. And they hired a temporary developer to build it for them. And they built it all using custom code. And it looked all right, but when the day came that he wanted to change it, he brought me in and he said, can you just adjust these few little things? And I said, yeah, that'll be really easy. But because it was built with somebody else's code and I'm not really familiar with that person and how they code, I let them know it's going to take me some time to figure out what they built before I can figure out how I can fix it. And they weren't very happy about that. If they would have just built in all that customization using, Community Builder, they would have been much better off in the future when they needed to make changes to that, because it can be done declaratively. I know a colleague of mine, DJ, he was helping me with this presentation, and he wanted to get a little practice in, and he built a little sidebar form, and it just edited some fields on the record we were looking at, and I was like, that's great, but you could just use page layouts if you wanted to specify which fields you wanted to see and which fields you wanted to edit. So really be thinking a lot about whether or not you need to use code before you do it, because you really want to safeguard yourself from problems in the future. So now let's talk a little bit about what makes Lightning Web Components look great, and I kind of teased this earlier, and that's the Lightning Design System. The Salesforce Lightning Design System includes the resources to create user interfaces consistent with the Salesforce Lightning principles, design language, and best practices. And that's pulled right from lightningdesignsystem.com. The Lightning Design System was developed by the team at Salesforce to make developing Lightning Web Components easier and more consistent. The elements that you see on a standard Lightning record page are all represented in the Lightning Design System, and they can be used to make custom solutions that look and feel like they belong in your org. This is accomplished through the Lightning Design System's 4 design principles, which are on their website. Number 1 is clarity. Eliminate ambiguity, enable people to see, understand, and act with confidence. What does that mean? Narrow the scope of what elements should look and feel like to reduce clutter and unnecessary design choices that may cause negative reactions from your end users. Some websites I've seen, they like to throw every bell and whistle at you just to show what they can do, but this causes distraction from the ultimate goal. So we need to keep it simple when we can and eliminate any of those distractions for our users. Number 2, efficiency. Streamline and optimize workflows, intelligently anticipate needs to help people work better, smarter, and faster. A big part of this that I always like to focus on is reducing clicks. If your custom solution can help your users complete their work and get through their workflow more efficiently, then you've probably done something right. Next is consistency. Create familiarity and strengthen intuition by applying the same solution to the same problem. Momentum is huge for your end users. As soon as the workflow kind of takes a wrong turn into unfamiliar territory, you risk negatively affecting their productivity. Make sure that their work is seamless across Salesforce by creating components that flow with a consistent design and feel, and you can do that by using the Lightning Design System. Beauty. Demonstrate respect for people's attention through thoughtful and elegant craftsmanship. This one kind of get lost in the shuffle when you're developing, but it's very important to respect the beauty of what you're building. If you don't take the time and the effort to make your components user-friendly and appealing to the eye, they won't take the time to use them or appreciate them the way you want them to. Even the simplest of tools can be a joy to use if they can elicit some kind of affection from your users. And so if you can make them kind of fall in love with your design, you'll find yourself kind of being an invaluable part to the team. So let's talk a little bit about the Lightning Component Library. This is available online, the documentation. All of these are available through the Lightning Design System website. You can find them there. One of the greatest tools available for Lightning Web Component development that I keep mentioning is this component library. These are all pre-built icons and buttons and navigation items and so much more that are available at your fingertips. If you're a developer, you can kind of just think of this like Salesforce's very own version of Bootstrap. They're all pre-built, pre-styled components that you can just reference in the front end to avoid lines and lines and lines of CSS styling. And not only save you time and energy when you're building things, but also, like we said before, keep consistent with what the users are seeing on their screen. If you look at a Lightning page and everything looks one way, and then this one component looks completely different using different colors, different, even edges, shapes, things like that, it can kind of be daunting for the user. So using the component library through the Lightning design system to make sure everything kind of flows and looks like it belongs is very important. Take, for instance, the waffle icon that's used to access the app launcher. And it's just a 3x3 stack of gray dots. And when you hover over it, it like pulsates and there's like a colorful wave. And if I asked you to just code that icon from scratch, a developer would probably, want to scratch their eyes out. It would take a long time, a lot of lines of code, a lot of, hover actions, animations, color changes. But luckily for us, when we use the component library, that icon is available in there, and it's really just represented by 4 lines of code. Super simple, no need to, start from scratch, reinvent the wheel. Just use what they're giving you, and everything will stay kind of consistent. So let's go ahead and dive in. We'll do a little hands-on demo. I'll show you a simple component that we built into a sandbox here. If you look here, I'm in an app for the GeekWise Academy, which Janae kind of touched on. I was a student at GeekWise Academy. It's where I learned how to code, and I also taught some classes there. But it is a coding school, and they have to deal with registrations and taking payments and everything like that. So I was thinking along the lines of the person at GeekWise Academy that needs to take the payments and track those. So what we have here is a list of some students at GeekWise Academy, and I can kind of jump into their record, the contact record. There's registrations that are listed here. This student registered for a couple of classes. Registration payments is another custom object that you see there's no registration payments right now. So if you were just using, say, a related list, you could dive into that registration. You can create a payment. You can click all the way through things, but we want to simplify that. So what we built just as a demonstration here is a simple Lightning web component that displays the student's picture, and it lists a couple of cards with their classes and how much money they owe on those classes, and the ability to make a payment right through here. So what you're looking at is a Lightning web component broken down into multiple parts, and we'll kind of show the code on that in a minute here. But what I can do here is this is representing a contact, it's representing a class and a registration and a registration payment. We're kind of touching on 4 different objects just in this one component. So if I wanted to make a payment, say a cash payment of $100 and hit submit, what'll happen is it'll give us a success toast. It'll update that balance $50. And if I refresh this page real quick here, what you'll see is down in the related lists, it actually created this registration payment for me. So instead of clicking through to the class registration and then creating a registration payment there, and then going back to the registration to check the balance, and then going back to the contact to see, what their status is, we can do that all right here from the contact record. Because at the end of the day, if I'm this person that's taking payments, Ray, this contact, is going to walk up to me, and that's going to be my most logical point to start at inside Salesforce. Let me search Salesforce for Ray. Let me pull up his contact record and make these payments right in here. You can actually, this pulls in pick list values from the payment object. Let's do a full payment here. Let's say he wrote me a check for $250. You'll see the balance goes to 0. We remove the option to make additional payments. So that's great. That's fantastic. That kind of solves our problem here, our use case. But let's take a look under the hood and kind of see exactly how that's built by looking at the code. So like I mentioned, JavaScript, HTML, CSS are the only things you really need to build these Lightning web components. In this case, we're not even using a CSS page. All of the styles we're pulling right from the Lightning design system. So starting off on the JavaScript page here, you see our imports at the top. We're pulling in certain fields from the contact record, from their related records for their classes, and we're just logging those in an array so we can use them later. The @API record ID, this pulls all the pertinent data that we're going to be calling below. You'll see this @track error. That's a variable to check for any errors that the methods might give us. The API myData sets the variable equal to the data returned from the wire method below. And you'll see kind of a couple of these wire methods here that are pulling in the data and setting those. Anything that is declared with this @wire method, those get the values from the record and they cannot be manipulated by the user. This is all kind of built in the name of safety. When you're using @wire, it's saying only pull in these fields that I told you to pull in, so that no one could kind of attack that and try and get additional information that we're not trying to give them. Down here at the bottom, you can see Slack image. That photo that we're using in there is actually pulled directly from their Slack account. And that's kind of represented just as a URL down here for Slack image. First name and last name, you see we're declaring all of that. So we go to the HTML page, you see it's pretty basic. You know, building out a component like that, we're talking about 25 lines of HTML. We're doing great, and no CSS page. So it saves us a lot of time of lines and lines of code. But you'll see here inside our template, we have our lightning card. That's just kind of like a container for HTML. You'll see on a lot of these items here, this SLDS, that is a direct reference to the Salesforce Lightning Design System. So when you're putting SLDS -grid, -gutters, -p, -top, medium, all those things, they're pulling right from the Salesforce Lightning Design System and letting the design system kind of determine how these things are going to look. And like I mentioned earlier, that's all in the name of consistency, making sure that, you know, if we're going to have a card, we want it to look just like any other card inside Salesforce. If we have a submit button, we want it to look like any other submit button, fonts, everything like that. We want those just to be represented as standard Lightning styles. We have our if false. So if Ray here didn't have any classes that he was registered to, we've accounted for that, and we'll just show a message that says no class registrations. And then lastly, we have this meta page here. And this is basically just to show us where this Lightning Web Component can be accessed. So we set targets here for a record page, for an app page, for a home page. In addition to that, we can expose it to other places like in communities, public pages as well. We can kind of determine all of that in this meta page. So one thing I talked about was modularity and that component-driven system. If you look at the HTML here, you'll see right in line 9 and line 15, we're actually calling other components. So when we look at this component, we see it as one component, but it's really broken down to this photo, this class, and payment card, all wrapped inside this component. So it's really 3 different components, and we're calling those other 2 in here. So if I do a search real quick for student photo, we can see the JavaScript. It's pretty simple, 5 lines of code here to pull in that photo. Student photo, we'll pull in the HTML as well. This HTML is setting the way that picture is going to look. So we've already built this photo out, just the photo as its own component. Now, every time I want to build a component on a contact record and I want to use that photo, I have that at my fingertips. I don't need to recode all of this over and over again. The same thing goes for the class information as well. So that's kind of under the hood, how it works, the nitty-gritty of the code there, the actual web component. Just to recap, as we're getting kind of towards the end of this, the Lightning Web Components are a new framework from Salesforce for building custom components. They make coding quick and easy, like I discussed, and like I showed you with the JavaScript files and the HTML files. I've built apps that are thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of code. And sometimes people can kind of brag about how many lines of code things are. But when you're on a deadline and you want to build something quick, or you got other projects on your plate, building something using only 25 lines of code, like we did with that contact record solution, that feels great. To get that done, get it set, and move on to the next thing without having to code thousands of lines. It's fantastic. We discussed a little bit about how custom code is not always the answer. You're going to need to really think long and hard before you code anything to make sure you don't set yourself up for failure later on. And lastly, the Lightning design system we talked about makes it simple and efficient to build great looking custom components that follow the Salesforce Lightning experience style. That component library, if you go and look online, you can scroll for a long, long time. If you can think of something that you've ever seen inside Salesforce, it's probably represented in there, and you can use it inside your custom component. I've also included some additional resources here when this slide deck becomes available on the website. For the component library that we discussed, the Lightning design system obviously has its own website that can kind of explain a little more of the philosophy behind their design system. So you can kind of take that in and use those thoughts as references when you're building things, kind of keep that same consistent style. There's also a link to a Lightning Web Component Basics Trailhead module if you want to really get your feet wet and jump in there and try and build one. And the last thing I've linked here is Salesforce's Dribbble profile. Dribbble is kind of a website for designers to display their work, and I find it really interesting to look at Salesforce's Dribbble profile and kind of see where their mind is on design practices and some of the prototypes for like record pages and report charts and crazy things that they're thinking of. They post a lot of really neat designs there. And if you're thinking about building custom Lightning web components that are more forward thinking and future thinking, looking at some of the examples they have in there can be a great idea of where to start. So that's my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed, and I appreciate everyone sticking around to listen to me. Back to you, Janae.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brad. That was great. So we do have a few questions that have come in for both Brad and Jeff. And if you still have questions, if you're not, type them into that module on the GoToWebinar control panel under questions, please do that now. I'm going to go ahead and get started with the ones that we have received. Let's see, Jeff, you talked about turning off persistent browser caching on in production. Do you ever recommend turning it on? Or what about sandbox environments?
So I have yet to find a situation where it was actually a good experience turned on in a production environment. So I'm sure Salesforce would probably speak against that. But the problem is the user experience is so hindered that I can't imagine why you'd want to use it. Maybe in a larger implementation where you've got a lot more complexity and the caching is important for speed. But to date, I've not seen a situation that doesn't, like I said, hinder the user. So it's more important that the user and the data experience is there. So I would recommend leaving that off.
Okay. Let's see. Does the Lightning design system need its own file for you to reference styles?
No, actually, like you saw in the HTML that I showed off there, you just reference that SLDS and then kind of whatever component you're pulling in, and it's already baked into the system. It's not like a CSS file where you need to add that to your file structure, reference it, pull in a link for that. It's all just kind of ready for you to use there, which makes it great and convenient and like an incentive to actually use their Lightning design system instead of your own CSS.
All right. Awesome. Let's see, since home pages aren't supported in the mobile app, how would you recommend building out homepage information for mobile use?
So that's going to be tough. The new mobile experience is definitely improving for more of the record pages and other things like that. So custom homepage experiences on mobile for me have tended to need to be a custom page if it's really that important to feature stuff like that. We are reliant on the new tools, so the page designers and things like that obviously let you do desktop publications now and mobile publications and separate it. but the homepage experience is more about the navigation and the features and stuff like that. So I have yet to really do something great with that homepage for mobile users other than like an iPad. So don't have a great experience other than custom.
All right. Let's see, it looks like the last question, are Lightning web components secure?
Yeah, the Lightning component framework, it all kind of operates using and following the security standards set by W3C to kind of control the source of the data that can be loaded. I did talk about that at-wire method and how we kind of protect what goes into that component. So there's safeguards on what's even accessible there. That way, nothing that you don't want to be displayed on the page can be accessible by like cross-site scripting or any kind of other attacks where people are trying to go into that backend and pull things out. So it's all very secure.
Okay. Great. I think that concludes the questions that we received. So thank you both, Bradley and Jeff, for today's presentations. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and introduce you to my colleague, JP, who is the Executive Director of Business Development for Shift3, and he's going to talk us through a little bit about Shift3 technologies and what we do.
Awesome. Janae, thanks so much, and thank you to Jeff and Bradley as well. I've been enjoying all of these webinars that we've been doing and great information. And Jeff, great to see you bring that one home from earlier as well. So thank you. And yeah, so we are Shift3 Technologies, and as Jeff mentioned, we worked very closely with him in regards to Salesforce, and Bradley, of course, being one of our phenomenal developers and admins on the Salesforce side as well. But to put things in context, probably want to step back and tell you a little bit more about not just our company, but the parent company that we work for, which is a company by the name of Bitwise Industries. And Bitwise, even more so than necessarily a company, is really more of a technology movement here in California's Central Valley, so a little bit north of where today's theme ran. So Bitwise was started 7 years ago with the idea that you could utilize the technology industry to revitalize an area. And so we basically came up with a three-pronged approach that you'll see outlaid here as place, education, and execution, or proof of concept, as we refer to it as well. So the place side is buildings, actually. We basically started off in an 8,000 square foot building on the north end of downtown Fresno, really with the idea that we could start to rally a tech community. For us out here, there was a decent tech scene and great up and coming firms and ideas and entrepreneurs. It's just that invariably they would reach a critical mass where they would feel like, well, if we want to continue to grow, if we want to thrive, we have to get out of the Central Valley and get out of Fresno. And so the building site for us really served as a rallying point of, why not Fresno? Why can't you have a great tech scene here? And so the buildings, those places of operations for that, we've been very, very successful with that. We've gone from our 8,000 square foot building on the north end of our downtown to now 8 buildings, actually. So we do have 4 in downtown Fresno. We've got 2 in Bakersfield, about an hour and a half south of us, and then 1 in Merced as well, and also in the 4th market that we're going to announce here pretty soon. So that's the place side. Education would be Geekwise Academy, which we heard Bradley referring to earlier. So obviously, we make a promise to these companies, stay local and you can grow, stay in the Central Valley, you can grow your business. Well, fulfilling that promise is having the human beings to do the job, to the coders, the developers, to make these things happen. And so that's where Geekwise Academy comes into play. They are the leading technical vocational school in the US right now for coding, about 6,000 graduates, and that was as of last summer when they were around 6 years old. So, obviously another year under our belts here. So I'm sure that number is considerably higher. And then there is the Shift3 component. Again, can call this execution, can call it proof of concept, but essentially rounding out our community by saying, hey, you can have a world-class tech community here in the Central Valley. You can create world-class developers in a place that was known primarily for agriculture. Shift 3 is there to make sure we're also building world-class applications right here in the Central Valley. So with that, we've got a number of competitive advantages that we have. We've obviously been doing custom software development for quite some time, and now are very happy to boast the Salesforce as another skill set for us. Again, with great contributions from Jeff as far as getting that division rolled out for us, and really great developers like Bradley and his team with just a number of certifications, and already just doing some great projects that we've come up with ourselves, some of which have been very specific to everything going on now with coronavirus. So if you look at Onward, CA actually, that is a Salesforce-based program that is helping people that have been displaced by coronavirus. It's helping connect them to employment as well as other resources. And then we also have another application that's helping to get groceries to those in need. It's called Take Care, and that's been deployed in our Central Valley, working in conjunction with a number of food banks, and also in Stockton as well. But so that's been some of the stuff our Salesforce team has been turning out. And for us, when we talk about providing opportunities, yeah, we're talking about providing them to companies for the opportunity for them to grow, for them to develop. But for us, providing opportunities to people that are not always reached out to directly or aggressively in technology. So if you look at some of our statistics, we've got a very strong focus, obviously, in recruiting people that have not always had the door so wide open to get involved. And so that's a big thing for us as well. Talking a little bit more about the technical expertise than the team that we have. If we go down one slide here, this is our leadership team. Irma, who is our founder and CEO, obviously one of the founding members of Bitwise itself as well. Janae, who you get to see now, thank you for putting on all of these promotions and helping us get the word out. We have Chris and Corey on our development side. Chris's job primarily really making sure that we're getting our products out the door and deployed on time. Meanwhile, Corey focusing on our development operations so that we are, not just executing now, but constantly developing and growing to make sure that we're always putting our best foot forward and learning the best processes and procedures. That's me, obviously. I oversee the Shift 3 custom software development as well as our Salesforce division, and then Amber, who is our specialist for the Salesforce side. So with this, a couple competitive advantages that we have, and we're going to get into this, is really our planning and processing on the front end. And we've all had the opportunity really to hear this through Jeff and Bradley's presentations today about really getting in there and understanding, and you hear that from both of them as far as when they're talking about how they approach something. They're not talking about I did this and I made this decision. They're rarely talking about themselves. They're always talking, however, about their end user. And so that's just something that we've specialized in when we were doing custom software development, and now also transition that into our Salesforce development as well. And then also just our approach, with Salesforce in particular, being an existing platform, working alongside our team is almost more of a staff augmentation than anything, and understanding that this application is a living, growing, breathing, and evolving thing, and making sure that we're there to think about what needs to be done right now, but also what needs are going to be coming up in the future. In addition to all of this, we've got our areas of expertise, as I mentioned, the Salesforce implementation and consulting, of course, and really rolling out brand new applications utilizing Salesforce as the platform. And then we have the other tools within our arsenal from the custom software development side, and those have come in handy just because there have been opportunities where we wanted to expand the usability of Salesforce beyond, into an application, into a user-facing website, and being able to integrate and have all those tools has definitely been a huge asset for us as well. So what I really want to talk about, though, today is the process, and this is something that we've developed for Shift 3 over time, but these are all things that you want to be very aware of and very actively looking for when you're working with anyone, be it a custom software development build or Salesforce in particular as well, really going through this process and making sure that you are receiving from whomever your vendor is exactly all the amazing things that Jeff and Bradley have been pointing out. When you hear them talking about, I'm doing this for the user, I'm putting myself in their shoes, I'm understanding that, this is customization, configuration, and that it has to be specialized. And so the way that we've always executed on this is obviously, our initial engagement. As I mentioned, we're looking at long-term relationships here. And so making sure that you have someone that you enjoy working with, and most importantly, someone that's making the decisions that are right for you in your company. If you were on the webinar last week, Jamin Brazel had said, the best way to earn trust with your client is to make sure that you're acting in their best interest. And so making sure that you have a partner that's doing that, that's speaking in the way that our speakers were today, as far as putting the client needs first and really looking to understand their journey and how best to customize Salesforce to get there. At that point, well, great, you've got the right mindset, but then it comes time to put the proverbial rubber to the road, where as your developers, as your admin, we are sitting there and listening and learning and understanding user roles. And again, Jeff had a great example that he was talking about, where he's talking about tabs. Sure, it would be very easy for him to line things up perhaps in a way that makes sense to him, but having the clarity to step outside that and say, no, you know what, if I was the end user on this, that's going to drive them crazy. I need to think about what's best for them. And so that's where that immersion part takes place, is really understanding all those nuances of the different user roles and making sure that we're making things as clear as possible. And then from there, we transition a bit to Envision, which is basically, we've shown that we've listened, we've absorbed the information. Now we start proactively putting it in front of the client to say, hey, when we talked about these things, this is how we interpreted it. This is what we suggest doing. And so we'll end up kind of looping here a little bit between these two, just making sure that, in an iterative fashion, we're putting ideas forward, we're gathering feedback, we're embracing the feedback, and then showing the revision again, until we get to a point where we realize that we've got a clear enough understanding, and we start moving on to execution. And there the tables turn a bit, in that in immersion we're really actively extracting information from our client to make sure we understand. In execution, we're now putting information in front of our clients to say, hey, this is what we built when we talked about this user role. Here's how we configured this. Here's how we've structured this. Here's the tools that we're using. And as Bradley was saying, even to the point of what level of customization do you want to get to, what makes the most sense, and what's best, not just for the organization right now, but also in the future. And then, of course, putting that in front of our clients and getting that validation from them. And again, in the same way that we go a bit between immersion and envision, we do the same thing between execution and validation, until finally we get to a point where we're ready to deploy it and start getting it out into the world. So so that's a little bit about our journey, the one that we've developed here at Shift 3. It has made us definitely experts on custom software development, and has been a huge success for us as well on the Salesforce side. So just with all of the options that you have, and obviously the investments that people make in the platform as a tool and running your organizations, again, making sure that before anything's done with it, there's a very clear understanding, and a lot of thought goes into anything before it that strictly becomes action. So that's a bit about our process. I want to thank everyone again for taking the time, and Janae for putting this on. And again, Jeff and Bradley, thanks so much for the invaluable information that you put forward today as well.
Great. Thank you so much, JP. All right. So at the beginning, I said you wanted to stay on. For those of you who have not had a chance to attend our webinars in the past, this is the point where I get to tell you that if you stay on at the end of the webinar, GoToWebinar will send you to a questionnaire, which will ask your mailing address. Considering that most of us are working from home at this time, we don't have your mailing address, but we would like to mail you a small thank you gift for attending today's webinar. So if you do not get the questionnaire, there's been some that have not, I will be sending out a follow-up email after this webinar, which will include the link to the full presentation deck as well as the video from today's webinar, and you can simply reply to that email and let me know where I should ship your gift to. So we are taking a little bit of a break. We've been doing these almost every week for the last several weeks. So our next webinar in the series will be held on Thursday, May 21st at 9 a.m. That one will feature the CFO of Joseph Gallo Farms, James Broadley, as well as Shift 3 certified admin Christian Coelho, to teach you how formulas can save your mind. So I encourage you to register now for that next one, and you can find all of the details at caltrailblazers.com. Again, thank you all for attending, and I hope you all have a great week. Bye-bye.